We have another person coming up now that is very dear to me. Jocelyn is somebody who is incredibly caring and so creative about how she approaches taking care of the people over at Lambda School. She's the head of people operations, and I'm very excited for her to share some exciting news and information with you today.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So hello, everyone. My name is Jocelyn. I'm the head of people at Lambda School. For those of you who don't know, Lambda School, we teach live online classes in technology across web development, iOS, Android, and data science for no upfront tuition. And on the other side of it, we are also a talent solution if your organization is seeking to hire diverse technical talent. And I do just want to say that my heart is warmed just being here, having everyone in the audience, and especially the ResX team, because everyone who is here, at least this is an assumption I'm making, is bought into the idea that we should be talking about mental health more openly, and that we've set aside a day to actually explore and learn what that might look like. So thank you for being here. Today, I'd like to share with you a little bit about how Lambda School is investing in the mental health of our ecosystem and the importance of cultivating a culture that normalizes conversations surrounding mental health. My hope is that you'll walk away from this session with a few tactical ways that you can begin to foster a safe and welcoming environment in your office and in your communities. And I do want to highlight that this will be a somewhat interactive session, so I might be asking you a few questions. Okay, so I wanted to set a little bit of context. One of Lambda School's core values is student obsession. And what that means to us is putting students at the forefront of how we make decisions and constantly thinking of and doing whatever is necessary so that our students can sleep at night. And this is where the conversation about mental health actually began at Lambda School. So our students index from very highly from vulnerable groups. Many of our students come from historically disadvantaged groups, including people of color, women, as well as economically and socially precarious communities, including rural areas. And so when students join Lambda School, they embark on a very rigorous and intense journey with us. Students in our full-time program give up working their day job for 9 months and interact live with our students and staff Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. And we also have evening courses where students are joining us Monday through Thursday, 6 to 9 p.m. after a full days of work. And they also are dedicating 4 hours on a day of their choosing, Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, to take our program. And that's a long time to dedicate to a program like ours, I think. And so an important thing to note is when we say students, we're not only talking about age groups that are typically attending university or college, but a lot of our students are pursuing second or third careers. They have families. They might be single parents. They might be children who are now taking care of their parents. And so many of our students have to make sacrifices, both big and small, to even be with us. And often that sacrifice comes at time spent with family and friends, which can have a negative impact on those relationships. And so while our students are interacting live with each other during the course hours, they're often alone in their physical experience, surrounded by family and friends who really don't understand what they're going through and the difficulty of the course itself. And so program hours are long, the content is complex and pretty fast-paced, and to really excel, a lot of our students spend time outside of course hours to really hone in on their skills. And students share their experiences with the greater community and a few of our Slack channels that focus on mental health, and we also have another one called Families. And often what our students are doing are sharing how they're trying to balance both being an excellent student, but also everything else outside of class. And so some of the examples of things that come up very regularly in these channels, they're probably two of our most active, are the ongoing guilt that our students feel about not spending time with their children or significant others, not being good enough at school or in work, Our students are sharing stories about breakups and divorces that are happening, and sometimes because they are pursuing their education at Lambda School, which makes it even more difficult to show up. And a few other things that come up sometimes are, health, related to health, or what is it like to go through putting your parents in hospice, or even how to handle death while going through a rigorous program. And so this is just to highlight that students are a big part of our why of what we do. But when we think of mental health, we also think of our students. We think of our staff. Because when our students are experiencing trials and tribulations, it's our staff that work to help them. Often this means late night phone calls or Zoom calls, emotional conversations, and the kind of work that doesn't leave our staff's minds or hearts at the end of the workday. And as employers, we recognize that this emotional work takes a real toll on our team. And we want them to care about our students, but we don't want them to get burnt out. And the mental health of our students has a rippling effect and impact on the health of our staff. So in addition to taking on the tangential experiences of our students' mental health, our staff are also susceptible to stress and anxiety of the modern workplace, which is compounded by the intensity of the valley and startups. Lambda School is a fast-paced startup. We're 24 months old or so, and things change really quickly, which can be really hard on the sense of self and the feeling of stability, which is something that I've struggled with a lot in my roles at Lambda because of the quick pace and things like that. And so the unique characteristics of our students paired with the experience of our team that's working to support them puts us in a unique position to kind of talk about mental health in the workplace, because it not only affects our staff, but it's our students who are also our customer. And so it's a bit full cycle for us. So I'd like to talk about a partnership that we recently made with Modern Health to bring mental health services to ensure that everyone in our ecosystem, students and staff, have the tools and support that they need to be successful. So Modern Health, who a few people are here today, provides a variety of tools and resources to our staff and touches on a lot of topics ranging from performance at work, relationships, D&I, stress and anxiety, just to name a few. And through our partnership, our students and staff have access to personalized plans, professional support, including coaching and therapy sessions, and up to 6 of those sessions are covered fully by Lambda School through partnership with Modern Health. And so while this is a significant financial investment for us, we believe that it's absolutely necessary. And the reason that we believe that is because the landscape of business is changing, and we believe that the ones that will be resilient and lasting are the ones that are investing in their people and helping them be whole humans, if you will. And so I'd actually like to pause right now and ask in the audience, what are things that you or your company are doing to support mental health in the workplace? So we're still in the early days of our partnership with Modern Health, and we've learned a lot already. And perhaps the most important thing that we've learned so far is that providing tools isn't enough. If we don't have a culture where we feel comfortable talking about our mental health, or that it's comfortable, accessible, but also actively encouraged, then we can provide all these tools, but it's not going to really do us any good. Folks who are utilizing the tool might not feel comfortable sharing their experience for fear of being ostracized or looked down upon. And similarly, folks who are curious about exploring their mental health and have questions about how to engage with the tools might not ask them for fear of what that might encounter or the anxiety that it builds, from the beginning of acknowledging that you might need to explore this. And so there are 3 things that we've learned so far, and I would like to go through those and share this with you. And the first relates to the presentation before, which is leadership needs to be vulnerable. When executives and department heads and managers are open about their experiences, they set the tone for their employees and create an environment which it's okay to share how we're feeling that day, or to share about something that is outside of our work life and how that might be impacting us here today. And so when we launched our Modern Health partnership, our CEO, Austin Allred, actually shared a very personal story with the staff and our students about, there was a day, 2 days before Christmas, where he received a phone call from an investor essentially saying that they weren't going to move forward with the deal. And so he had to spend that day, 2 days before Christmas, calling all of his employees to let them know that they no longer had a job. And on top of that, it was a few weeks before the birth of his first child. And so I think that we can imagine what that might feel like to go through that. And he highlighted that he has a very great support system that was able to help him get through that. But what if you didn't have that? What would that experience be, and how would you feel, and how can you move past that? And so the way that he introduced this partnership really set the tone that it's okay for us to talk about this openly, and that we should be able to feel like we can share these vulnerable stories, and that's okay. The second thing that we learned is that cultural change doesn't happen in a silo. We can provide tools to staff and students to improve their individual well-being, but if we still have a culture where we express frustration in unproductive ways, maybe we raise our voices, maybe we belittle others, or we're passive-aggressive in our communications and actions instead of confronting conflict in a positive way, then we're not really cultivating an environment that values mental health. We create an environment where we acknowledge each other as individuals outside of our specific roles, and that is something that we're trying to work on right now as part of this partnership. And perhaps the third thing that we've learned so far that's been really important is recognizing the needs of your community and team. So our students and staff range across all 50 states, and the normalcy of discussing mental health varies depending on where you live and the communities you grew up in. And so there is still some stigma around talking about mental health or saying that you are going to a therapist. And so one thing that we found is, like, we know this is not normal everywhere. Our audience is all across. So we created a guide on what it is like and what you can expect from your first therapy session. So that's a guide that we could provide to staff and students, knowing that new experiences can be daunting and scary. But if we normalize the language and the concept of seeing a therapist, then that can help alleviate some of the anxiety folks might be experiencing. So we're still in the early stages right now, but what we've learned is it's our leaders that need to be vulnerable because they're setting the tone. It's not enough to provide a tool or resource, but you have to cultivate a culture in which really values that through their actions and behaviors. And two, you need to know where your audience is and find out what are the barriers that might prevent someone from utilizing a tool that you're trying to provide. And so that's all to say that providing tools is not enough, but you have to go above and beyond in some way, and that there needs to be intention behind what you do and have that intention be deliberate. We have a short video where some of our students are talking about their mental health and their struggles and some of the positive ways that having access to some of these tools have changed their perspective. And so that is out in the world somewhere. You can figure out a way, but it's a really touching video, especially someone who's worked there, and we know our students intimately. You hear of these names, but then to put a face to the story is really great. What I wanted to convey the most is that we're not perfect. At Lambda School, we're always learning. We're in the beginnings of our journey of providing, tools and resources because we want to be that company and culture, but we're not an expert. Otherwise, there might be a playbook that we all could read. And so I'm certain that we will continue to encounter situations where we could have been more proactive and figure out ways that we can foster a better environment. And this is where I'd like to make it more of a discussion rather than me talking, because we're all here to learn, and I would love to learn from you as well. And so I was curious if you would be willing to share, what are some ways that you or your company, or maybe that you're sparked an idea right now of how can you break down the barriers that your company or community are facing in terms of talking about mental health?
We work with a process called the Blueprint of We collaboration process, or collaboration document. And this is a customized document that any two people or a team or an entire organization writes together. And the purpose is to build and maintain relationships based on trust. So we use this document to create the relationship we want. And there's a series of question prompts in there for people to answer, and we can write in whatever questions we want. So it creates a place for people to write whatever information they want to about themselves, and a process to talk about it over time as the relationship changed. So it makes space for the mental health conversations and also for lots of other things. It becomes just one thing that we choose to reveal about ourselves that helps us work together more effectively.
That's really awesome. Can I ask you some follow-up questions?
Sure.
So is that a document where it's sort of saying, this is me, a little bit of me, this is a little bit of you, and are the questions geared towards like how we can work better together, or is it mostly just to get an understanding?
The questions are general, and people can answer them in whatever they want. So they're not under any pressure to reveal things they don't want to. Some people use it to, part of it is about how we work best with each other and what our warning signs are when we're not working so well together. And some people write about preferring to have meetings in the morning, and do they want to think through things themselves and then talk about it, or do they want to talk out loud first and then think? All kinds of those things that aren't usually so personal, but there's space for at whatever level people want to answer. And then as they have the conversations about the document, people will add to it, and you may write something that I realize, I can say something about myself in that area too, and that we establish safety that way.
Awesome. And is that document one-to-one, or is it like everyone is in it together?
Yes, but either. It can be between two people or a team or an entire organization. So it can be set up in the company's intranet or Google Docs or whatever, and everybody fills in their portions. And as they're establishing project teams, the project manager can gather what individual people have written about themselves, and then they can customize it for that particular project or group. So it can be either an ongoing relationships or fluid.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing. That's really awesome. What that makes me think of is I have a working relationship with one of my coworkers where we are really great together outside of work, but put us in a room together to discuss a topic that we disagree on. And sometimes it gets really heated, and there's visibly, like in our posture and even like in our skin tone of flushness, we can tell the other person is really just irritated, and we've established something verbally. We don't have a written document where we'll pause the meeting at some point and say like, hey, how are you feeling right now? And we'll share that, and we'll say like, what's your perspective of this meeting right now? And then we'll share that, and we can say like, I interpreted this way, and we have that kind of conversation. And it can take a little bit, especially if our emotions are running high, but oftentimes when we get to that point, if that happens in our meeting, we always end it saying, okay, how do you feel now? And how might you have felt different if we had ended the conversation earlier? And so that's what that made me think of as a more formalized and maybe a easier way to go over that barrier, because it's written first and you don't have to engage on it. So thank you so much for sharing. Is there anyone else in the audience that has something you'd like to share?
I shared a few of these with my group earlier this morning, so sorry if you were there and this is a repeat, but a couple others, new spices. One thing we have is a Slack channel that's like our happy, healthy Slack channel that is sort of anybody is invited to participate around questions about their sort of well-being or thoughts about their well-being. It ends up being a really nice place for people to say things like, I've never gone to therapy before. Does anybody know what that's like? Or does anyone know how to find a therapist? Or I haven't been feeling well in these types of ways. Has anybody got any good resources for this sort of thing? And it's like probably one of the most active Slack channels. And you see that there are like some people who have like a larger body of experience that they feel comfortable sort of bringing there. And people who are like less familiar with topics are also pretty comfortable sharing just like doubts or concerns or whatever. And it's like people who are interacting in that channel are often not interacting during the day in the workplace. And so it also helps increase connectivity between different people. So that's one thing that's going on that's going well. Another thing that I mentioned to my group this morning is like, I go to therapy every week, and it is like in bold letters on my calendar that's like mental health appointment. And then whenever I have the opportunity to like talk with other people about their lives or what's going on, I will often say things like, like my therapist and I were talking about something like this or whatever. And so it's just like normalizing that, like, I go to therapy. You could go to therapy. Anybody could go to therapy. It's totally fine. It's fine to talk about it. I'm talking about it. You won't be judged if you talk about it. It's just like getting the conversation out there. And then the third one that sort of comes to mind for me is that as a leadership team, I try to help our leaders identify opportunities where they can display vulnerability or lead conversations that involve them sharing reflections, and that means that like we have to do that within the leadership group so that people are developing those skills and familiarity with like talking about themselves or talking about fears or concerns, because it's not always like super instinctual or natural when you're in a position of power to like reveal kind of more personal things about yourself. So I do a lot of like kind of one-on-one coaching or like kind of planned situations where I'm like, this would be a good time for you to talk about like whatever. And I'm able to kind of like help leaders feel that they can participate in that way. And I think that helps people. It helps people see that stuff.
Definitely. Thank you for sharing. Do you mind if I ask you some follow-up questions?
Go for it.
So one of my questions is with your Slack channel. You mentioned that there's a lot of folks who are interacting in the Slack channel that might not work with each other day to day. Do you notice that maybe some of these conversations are starting to come out of Slack as well?
Yeah, so I think we do see them more around the office, and we see people sort of like engaging in smaller kind of like, oh, we were talking about that Slack, and then we took it in Slack, and then we took it offline and like went for a coffee or different things like that. I think it's more of a relationship building tool and less of like necessarily that I'm like culturally seeing like everybody being like, well, in the Slack channel, we had this conversation. Let's bring everybody in. Because I do think people are still a little more private and a little more sensitive. But there is a magnification effect.
Definitely. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Anyone else that might want to share something that they're doing personally or in their organization?
Thank you. Hi. So at my company, it's a really small 30-person company right now, and we have an office, a very small office in San Francisco, but our work remote policy is very strong and vibrant. And my 25-minute commute from East Bay, I don't actually have to do if I don't want to, and I can work from home when it's better for me to work from home. And so just having that like flexibility of like where I can choose to like do my best work is really amazing. And specifically around that, one way that my company really helps make that feel like a very inclusive accommodation. Each of our meetings, we have video calls, usually. It's very encouraged to like have your video on. But when people are in a conference room at the office, every person has their laptop up so they can show their direct face. So you can see everybody that's in the meeting. It's not just like the one big one that like shows the whole room or like somebody's side of their head and that's about it. So it makes you feel like very part of the conversation. You can see people's facial reactions as you're having the different conversations. And I think that's one really great way that they're kind of including everyone in the conversation.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. We are also we have 2 offices, one here in SF in Utah, and then we have remote employees. And that's actually something that we struggle with a lot. We have the big rooms, but then we also don't. But the beauty of having a somewhat remote and distributed team is that we always have the Zoom calls as well. So we have a flexible work environment as well. So we've noticed sometimes someone might not come in for a couple days, and when they do, they're like, then they might share. But I like the flexibility. We found that to be useful as well. All right. If there's no other takers, I really appreciate those of you that shared. Some other ways that I personally try to create a culture within at least our SF office or when we're visiting others is, one, if you notice that someone might be acting a little differently or they look a little down, I often say like, hey, how are you feeling? Or how's your day going? And sometimes, people share or don't share, but I know from my own self, I recall a day I was having a really difficult day in my personal life, and someone asked me how I was feeling, and from a follow-up conversation that I'd had separately, asked me, do you feel alone today? And I wasn't in a place to like have a conversation, but I remember that so much. And later that evening when I went home, like that was something that I could like hold on to. So sometimes the things that we're talking about, like what can we implement at our company? Is it a tool like modern health? Is there a big initiative that we can do? A lot of a lot of bridging the barrier is connecting with your fellow employees or your coworkers, asking them genuinely how they are doing. And if you are asked that question, being honest about it instead of saying, sure, okay, I'm all right. Maybe it's a little bit overshare, but like diving in just a little step further can help normalize talking about our feelings and what we're going through outside of work in the workplace. So thank you so much, everyone. I know I ended a little early, but thank you.